The glass walls stretched around us like an aquarium, trapping the light and magnifying the sense that everyone inside was on display. I stood at the head of the long table, the Chicago skyline stretching endlessly behind me, but my focus was on the dozen faces from across the ocean who sat patiently in their immaculate suits. Their notebooks were lined up with precise order, pens placed neatly on top. They had traveled 14 hours for this meeting, and I had spent 11 months preparing for it. The rhythm of our dialogue was a dance I knew well. One sentence in English, a pause, then my translation into Japanese. Their response, soft but deliberate, then my return translation for the American executives who thought fluency was an indulgence instead of a necessity. I had learned the art of letting silence sit between words. Silence, I understood, was not emptiness. It was a container for respect, a moment for reflection, a way of honoring the conversation itself. Rowan-san, Mr. Takahashi began, his voice carrying the deliberate cadence of a man who understood the weight of each syllable. Before we finalize the proposed timeline, I would like clarification about your plan for currency risk. Volatility is not our preferred partner. I inclined my head. Of course, Takahashi-san. Switching into Japanese, I answered carefully, explaining how a staggered hedging system could absorb fluctuations without undermining long-term value. He listened intently, eyes on me, not on the papers in front of him. When I finished, he tapped his pen once against his notebook, then set it down with quiet finality. It was a sign of approval. I should have felt calm. Instead, a thin current of unease had been running through me since the night before, the kind of instinct that is more felt in the stomach than the mind. I had ignored it because preparation usually smothers nerves. I had studied every clause, rehearsed every cultural nuance, and memorized every question that could be asked. Still, a storm I could not yet see was forming. The door opened. The sound was soft, but in a room tuned to the subtleties of silence, it was as disruptive as a dropped glass. Every head turned. I kept my eyes forward. He walked in with the arrogance of someone who believed presence was enough to command authority. His suit was the kind of dark wool that whispered money, his watch gleamed with unnecessary polish, and his smile was stretched too wide for the occasion. "Ladies and gentlemen," he said in English, his voice booming in a room that respected restraint. "So sorry for my delay." He was not sorry. He had been in the company less than 3 weeks and already behaved as if the walls bent to accommodate his ambition. His name was Connor Blake. I had met him twice before. Once in the elevator, where he had looked me up and down with the casual calculation of someone evaluating utility. Once in a strategy briefing, where he had interrupted me to explain a concept I had just finished articulating. Both times I had felt the urge to push back. Both times I chose diplomacy. He took my chair. "Rowan," he said, glancing at me as though I were a guest in my own house, "thank you for warming up the room." Warmth had nothing to do with it. I did not respond. I looked instead at the delegation, reading the polite restraint in their posture, the way Mr. Takahashi's eyebrow tilted barely upward, the way Ms. Yamamoto, their legal counsel, adjusted her glasses and studied Connor as if filing information for later use. Connor opened his leather folder. His hands moved with unnecessary flourish, as though the act of turning a page was a demonstration of leadership. He cleared his throat. "Effective immediately," he announced, "Ms. Doyle's services will no longer be required." The words floated into the air like smoke from a gun. No one moved. My chest tightened, but my face remained steady. He continued, stumbling over Mr. Takahashi's name for the third time. "I will personally lead these negotiations. From here on, we will move with American-style efficiency." I heard the clock tick. 1, 2, 3. Each second landed louder than his voice. I bowed to the delegation. "I apologize for this disruption," I said in Japanese. "There have been internal changes within the company. I will ensure a smooth transition." Their silence was not passive. It was loaded. Mr. Takahashi tapped his pen again, but this time the sound was sharper, more pointed. Ms. Yamamoto's gaze shifted from me to Connor and back, her expression unreadable but alive with calculation. "English only," Connor snapped. "This is an American company. We need transparency." His words were a hammer where a feather would have been more powerful. I gathered my papers. My hands moved slowly, each gesture deliberate, each motion calculated not to betray the churn in my chest. I rose, smoothed my jacket, and walked toward the door. At the threshold, I stopped. I looked back, speaking now in English so Connor would understand every word. "If you need clarification on the terms we discussed, you have my number." Mr. Takahashi inclined his head almost imperceptibly. Ms. Yamamoto's pen paused mid-stroke. Connor, oblivious, shuffled through the papers I had left behind, squinting as if they were written in a code only I could decipher. The door closed behind me. The elevator hummed as it carried me down 41 floors. With each number that blinked past, I felt layers fall away. Title, office, the illusion of safety and loyalty. By the time the doors opened into the marble lobby, I was no longer director of strategic initiatives. I was simply Rowan Doyle, a woman standing on the edge of something vast and unknown. The February wind cut through my coat when I stepped outside. The city was alive with noise, but it sounded distant as though I were underwater. My phone buzzed, 3 messages from the Japanese delegation, 2 from other clients, 1 from a journalist who had been circling the deal like a hawk. I did not answer. Not yet. I walked. The streets smelled of exhaust and roasted chestnuts from a vendor at the corner. I kept walking, letting the noise of the city press around me until it dulled the sharp edge of the moment I had just endured. Every footstep was a question I was not yet ready to answer. I ducked into a small cafe on State Street, the kind of place with brick walls and old photographs of Chicago when the river was still thick with smoke. I ordered tea instead of coffee, something gentle that would anchor me. My hands wrapped around the porcelain cup, absorbing its heat as though it could refill me from the inside out. My phone buzzed again. This time I turned it over. The first message was from Takahashi himself. A single line in Japanese, "We value continuity. We hope to speak with you again." The second was from Ms. Yamamoto. "Do not lose contact. Please confirm your availability." The third was from an unfamiliar number, American. A client I had introduced to Veltrix a year earlier. "If you are leaving the company, we need to talk." I set the phone down. My pulse slowed, but my thoughts began to accelerate. Connor had made 3 mistakes in less than 20 minutes. He assumed authority equaled respect. He confused volume with clarity, and he dismissed relationships as if they were accessories rather than foundations. In international business, relationships are the currency, and he had just handed me all the leverage. I drank my tea to the bottom. The steam was gone, the leaves collected at the edge of the cup like a map of choices. The cafe's window reflected the street, and in that reflection I saw myself differently. Not dismissed, not discarded, freed. The decision settled on me not with thunder but with quiet certainty. I would not fight to return to Veltrix. I would build something they could never control. I paid in cash, left a tip, and stepped back into the cold. My phone buzzed again, this time with a name I had expected, Sarah Hartley. Sarah was the lawyer you called when you wanted more than defense. She was the one you called when you wanted to move a piece on the board and make your opponent wonder if the game had just changed. "Rowan," she said when I answered, her voice smooth with the confidence of someone who already knew the situation. "Come to my office. Now." Her office was on the 30th floor of a building most people walked past without noticing. That was intentional. The lobby was quiet marble, no directory on the wall, no receptionist announcing arrivals, just a card reader and an elevator that opened with silence. Sarah stood when I entered. Tall, sharp suit, hair pulled back, eyes that missed nothing. "I have been waiting for this call for 6 months, she said. I frowned. "Waiting?" Veltrix hired Connor Blake for one reason, to clean house, to push out people like you who make insecure men nervous. "I knew your name would be on his list before he even finished his orientation." The words landed, but they did not sting. They clarified. She gestured to the chair across from her desk. "Sit. Espresso?" "Yes, please." Her assistant appeared with 2 cups. I wrapped my fingers around the warmth, grounding myself again. "You want to know your options," Sarah said. "Legally, you are clear. No non-compete. No non-solicitation. Intellectual property is tied to company resources, not the relationships you cultivated, which means every client I brought in is still mine," I finished. She smiled. "Which means you would be foolish not to start something of your own." The folder she slid across the desk already had my name printed on the front, Doyle Strategies, LLC. She had prepared it in advance. "You were ready for me," I said. "I was," she admitted. "And so were you, otherwise you would not be sitting here." I opened the folder. Inside were the documents to incorporate, establish banking, insurance, the skeletal structure of a company waiting for flesh and blood. "I can have you operational in 72 hours, Sarah said. 48 if we push. And Rowan," she leaned forward. "You do not just have the legal right, you have the moral one. They dismissed you in front of clients who trusted you. That is a wound Veltrix cannot close, but you can." I stared at the papers, the weight of them heavier than steel. Signing them would mean crossing a threshold I could never return from. but the decision had already been made in the elevator when I left that room. I signed. Sarah's pen clicked with satisfaction. "Congratulations," she said. "You are now in business." I exhaled for the first time in hours. The city looked different when I walked back onto the street. Not hostile, not indifferent. Open, the air bit at my skin, but I welcomed the sting. It reminded me I was alive, unshackled. The skyscrapers did not loom above me, they leaned as though listening. I returned to my apartment, a loft I had chosen for its quiet and its view of the river. The walls were lined with books in 4 languages. My desk was cluttered with maps, notes, and the artifacts of a life spent moving between cultures. A paper fan from Kyoto, a porcelain teacup from Beijing. A framed photograph from Berlin, taken at 3 in the morning after a negotiation that had lasted 2 days straight. I placed Sarah's folder in the center of the desk. The weight of it seemed to rearrange the room. I opened my laptop and drafted the simplest of notes. 3 sentences to Takahashi, 2 to Ms. Yamamoto, 1 to the client who had messaged me earlier. None of them mentioned Veltrix. None of them mentioned Connor Blake. Each was simply a promise, I remain available. My commitment is unchanged. My expertise is yours if you choose it. I hesitated before hitting send, not out of fear, out of respect for the gravity of the step. Then I pressed the key. The silence that followed was heavier than any noise. I leaned back, staring at the ceiling beams that cut across the loft. Every choice I had made in the past 15 years had led here. Every late night, every red-eye flight, every phrase practiced until pronunciation bent to my will. It had not been for a company logo. It had been for the knowledge, the relationships, the bridges built brick by brick, and those bridges still stood. The screen glowed faintly in the dim light of my apartment. I waited for replies, but none came immediately. That was fine. In Japanese business culture, silence could mean many things, and patience was not weakness. I closed the laptop and walked to the window. The river below was black glass streaked with gold from the streetlights. The city kept moving, indifferent to one woman's upheaval. I poured myself a glass of water and stood there, drinking slowly, listening to the hum of the radiator. My body still carried the tension of the conference room, the humiliation of being dismissed like an extra in someone else's play. But beneath that sting was something else. Relief. The decision had been made for me, but it had freed me from a cage I had been pretending was a stage. I opened my notebook. The same one I had carried into hundreds of meetings. I turned to a blank page and wrote 3 words, "What comes next?" The answer was not immediate, but the question itself gave shape to the night. I slept little. When I did, my dreams were crowded with faces, contracts, cities I had walked through half asleep after flights that landed at dawn. In each dream, doors closed, but windows opened. I woke with my pulse steady and my mind sharp. By morning, I had a plan. The first step was intelligence. I needed to know what Connor intended to do next. He would move quickly. He believed speed was victory. He would try to force Kyoto International into a deal before they could process what had happened. That would be his downfall, but I needed proof. I called Marcus. He had been my assistant for 3 years. Quiet, precise, the kind of person everyone underestimated until it was too late. He answered on the first ring. "Rowan," he said. I heard. Of course he had. News traveled through offices faster than fire. "Meet me in Chinatown," I told him. Same place as last time. The restaurant was small, the kind where the air was heavy with steam and garlic, and 100 conversations blurred together into safe cover. Marcus slid into the booth across from me and set a folder on the table. "He is in over his head," Marcus said without preamble. "These are his notes for the next Kyoto meeting." I opened the folder. My breath caught. The arguments were blunt, poorly framed, stripped of any understanding of cultural nuance. It was a list of demands masquerading as strategy. Connor intended to cut timelines by 30% and slash prices without acknowledging the face-saving process so central to Japanese negotiation. "This is not a plan," I murmured. "It is a threat dressed up as efficiency." Marcus poured tea for both of us, his movements steady. "He thinks Kyoto has no other options. He does not know about Pinnacle logistics." I froze. "Pinnacle? They have been circling for months. Kyoto has spoken with them quietly, but they preferred working with you. Pinnacle wants an acquisition. Kyoto wants partnership." I leaned back, heart pounding. Connor believed Veltrix was Kyoto's only bridge to North America. He did not realize there was another bridge waiting. That ignorance would destroy him. "I need you to stay," I said. 2 more weeks, watch everything, document everything. Every meeting, every email, every failure." He smiled faintly. "Already resigned, but my notice buys me time. And when I am free, maybe your new company will need a COO. I laughed for the first time since the conference room. Maybe it will. We left the restaurant with no goodbyes, just a nod. Back at my loft, I drafted 3 more messages. One to Linda Voss, the journalist who had been chasing the Kyoto story. One to Mr. Takahashi. One to Sarah Hartley, confirming incorporation. Linda answered first. Rowan, I heard Connor just shot himself in the foot. Care to comment? On the record, no, I said. Off the record, maybe. We spoke for half an hour. I gave her context without names, patterns without specifics, the shape of a story that would soon become front-page material. She left the call hungry. That was what I wanted. Takahashi answered second. His voice was calm, but the pauses between words carried meaning. Doyle-san, he said in Japanese, the presentation after you left was interesting. I imagine so, I replied. Mr. Blake believes our cultural values are impediments. He used the phrase paralysis by analysis. We disagree. My breath tightened. I chose my words with care. My position at Veltrix has changed, but my commitment to helping Kyoto succeed has not. I will have a card for you soon. There was a pause. Then he said softly, we will speak again in 73 hours. It was not just a promise, it was a test. That night Sarah called. Her voice was sharp with excitement. Tell me you saw the email, she said. What email? She forwarded it. Connor had sent a message to the entire Asia-Pacific team, CCing the board. In it, he outlined a new strategy of aggressive pricing and short timelines. Worse, he blamed cultural misunderstandings for the delays, claiming the previous negotiator, me, had prioritized relationships over results. He just handed you a gift, Sarah said. This is discrimination and defamation in one neat package. Keep it, it will save you later. I do not want to sue them, I said. I want to beat them. Even better, but keep the email anyway. I printed it and placed it in a folder. Evidence, insurance, a sword if I ever needed it. The next morning, my business cards arrived by courier. Simple, white stock, black letters, Rowan Doyle, strategic consultant, nothing flashy, just truth. I sent 3 emails. To Takahashi, as discussed, I remain committed to supporting Kyoto International. Doyle Strategies is at your service. To 5 former clients, I have begun a new venture. I would be honored to continue our partnership under a new banner. To Linda, I am ready to go on record. The replies came faster than expected. Takahashi, meeting requested. Soon. 2 former clients, immediate interest. Linda, tonight, bring your best quotes. That evening, we met at the Chicago Athletic Association. The bar glowed with low lamps and the polished sound of ice against glass. Linda leaned forward, recorder on the table. Tell me about Veltrix, she said. They are undergoing a realignment, I replied. New leadership brings new vision, but vision without cultural intelligence is blindness. Her eyes lit. That's on the record? Yes. By the time she left, she had the bones of a story that would wound Veltrix in the only place that mattered, credibility. I returned home past midnight. The city had grown quiet, the river a sheet of steel under the moonlight. I placed the recorder with Linda's questions beside my notebook. The words still rang in my ears. Vision without cultural intelligence is blindness. I knew then that I was no longer surviving. I was preparing for war, not the loud kind, the quiet one. The one fought with patience, precision, and respect. And in that moment, I knew something else with absolute certainty. Connor thought he had ended me in that conference room. He was wrong. He had just created his most dangerous competitor. The morning after my meeting with Linda felt different. The light that poured through my window was the same pale winter sun that had touched the city every day that month, but it seemed brighter, as if it had been polished. I made coffee strong enough to carry me through a 12-hour day and sat at the table with Sarah's folder open in front of me. The legal structure was simple. A name, an address, a bank account, the promise of liability protection. But when I touched the papers, I felt something far larger. It was as though the weight of 15 years in corporate halls had been distilled into these documents. All the flights, the translations, the endless meetings, the patient cultivation of trust, it was all here, condensed into the possibility of independence. I wrote the name across the first page in my own hand, Doyle Strategies. It looked stark, almost severe, but it also looked permanent. At 9 o'clock, Marcus called. They are unraveling faster than I expected, he said. Connor canceled a quarterly review with Thompson Industries to play golf with potential investors. I closed my eyes. Thompson was a client who valued ritual and continuity. They had scheduled quarterly reviews for 5 years without fail. To cancel was not just careless, it was insulting. He is giving you clients without realizing it, Marcus continued. I have a list, I will bring it to you tonight. Be careful, I told him. I always am, he said, but I heard the tension in his voice. By late afternoon, Linda's article was live. The headline stretched across the financial pages: Cultural Competency Crisis, How Veltrix Dynamics Lost Its Edge in Asia. She had written with precision. She did not name me, but she did not need to. Every insider would know exactly whose absence had caused the collapse. She quoted experts who explained that cultural intelligence was not optional, that dismissing it was equivalent to cutting the foundation out of a building. She described the Coyote deal as on life support, a phrase that would ripple through investors' minds like an electric shock. My phone lit up with messages. Some were from colleagues who had once dismissed me but now wanted to catch up. Some were from competitors offering partnerships thinly disguised as sympathy. And some were from strangers who had read the article and wanted to hire me. I answered none of them immediately. Patience was still my sharpest weapon. That night, Marcus arrived at my apartment with a folder thick enough to bend. These are all the clients you personally brought into Veltrix, he said. I gathered the names from press releases, trade journals, and announcements, all public information. They cannot accuse you of theft. I spread the pages across the table. Each name was a story. Each line represented months or years of building trust, of long flights and longer conversations, of dinners in quiet restaurants where the real deals were made. They were never Veltrix's clients, I murmured. They were mine, Marcus nodded. Exactly, and many of them are already unhappy. Connor is treating relationships like transactions. That never works for long. When he left, I stayed awake until dawn drafting letters. Each one was personal, not promotional. I wrote to the CEO of Nexus Automotive reminding him of the factory visit we had shared in Osaka. I wrote to the head of Raventech recalling the late-night call that had saved a shipment when customs threatened to block it. I wrote to David Thompson himself, thanking him for 5 years of trust. Each letter was a thread in the tapestry I was weaving. Each one said without saying, I am still here. I am still the bridge. The next day, Sarah called again. Rowan, the paperwork is official. Doyle Strategies is registered in Switzerland with a subsidiary in Chicago. You are operational. The words landed with the weight of a starting gun. I need an office, I said. Take a temporary space. You will outgrow it in months. She was right. I rented a small suite near the river. Just 3 rooms, one for me, one for Marcus when he joined, and one for meetings. The windows were narrow, but the view showed the skyline from a different angle. Not from the 42nd floor of Veltrix, but from the street level, where life pulsed and the river carried everything forward. I hung nothing on the walls. I wanted them bare, waiting to be filled with victories. 2 days later, I met Takahashi at the Peninsula Hotel. He bowed slightly deeper than protocol required. That alone told me everything. Doyle-san, he said, we have reviewed your proposal. It is acceptable, but we have concerns. Veltrix is large, you are new, can you deliver the same level of service? I had anticipated the question. What Veltrix offers is infrastructure, I said. What I offer is intelligence. You do not need a skyscraper to understand that your AI logistics platform must integrate carefully with American supply chains. You need someone who respects both your technology and the psychology of this market. Ms. Yamamoto glanced at me, then spoke. And if Veltrix interferes? I slid a folder across the table. Inside was the legal opinion Sarah had prepared. It detailed exactly why Veltrix had no grounds to challenge me. They can threaten, I said calmly, but they cannot touch us. Takahashi studied the pages, then looked up. His expression did not change, but his bow when he rose was unmistakably respectful. Doyle-san, he said, we look forward to working with you. In that moment, I had my first client. The contract was worth millions, but money was not the true victory. The victory was validation. I walked back to my office in the sharp wind, my coat pulled tight, my bag heavier with the weight of signed documents. I felt taller, as though the buildings themselves had shifted around me. Inside the small office, I placed the contract on my desk and stared at it until the lines blurred. The quiet fight was no longer theory. It had begun. The following week blurred into a storm of work. I recruited 2 analysts who had left Veltrix in disgust. I hired a cultural consultant from Tokyo to review every document for nuance. I worked 18-hour days, fueled by coffee and determination. Each night I returned to my loft and opened my notebook. On the first page, where I had written what comes next, I added a single word, this. Marcus joined officially 2 weeks later. You are COO, I told him. Equity, not salary, we build this together. His smile was quiet, but his eyes shone. Then let's build something better. On a Tuesday evening, he handed me another memo accidentally sent to his inbox. It was addressed to the Veltrix board. In it, Connor admitted that Kyoto had engaged alternative consulting services me. He blamed me for sabotaging negotiations, claimed I had overpromised. Let him, I said. While he plays defense, we move forward, Marcus nodded. And clients are watching. Thompson, Nexus, Raventech, they all have renewals coming. I leaned back in my chair. Then we give them a choice. Not sabotage, not pressure, just a better option. That Friday, my phone rang. Rowan, David Thompson said, his voice clipped. Connor canceled our quarterly review. Apparently golf is more important than our $50 million spend. Can you take over our strategy work? Yes, I said simply. Within a week, 3 more clients followed. By the end of the month, Doyle Strategies was no longer just an idea. It was a firm. Small, lean, but alive. The quiet fight was being won not with shouting, not with lawsuits, but with something far sharper, respect. And as I looked at the stack of contracts on my desk, I realized something else. Connor had not destroyed me. He had built me. The morning sunlight spilled through the narrow windows of the office, falling in pale stripes across the polished wood floor. I poured myself a cup of coffee and let the warmth seep into my hands as I studied the stack of folders in front of me. Each folder contained pieces of the new company, client files, contracts, operational notes. They were simple sheets of paper, but to me, they represented years of expertise distilled into possibility. Marcus was already at his desk, unpacking his laptop and reviewing the documents I had left out the night before. He did not speak, and I did not either. We did not need words at first. The quiet in the room felt purposeful, like a breath held before a long dive. I opened my notebook and wrote, organize, prioritize, measure. Every client, every lead, every potential partnership had to be considered with care. Connor Blake had made the mistake of rushing and assuming authority was enough. I knew the advantage lay in the precision of patience, in respect for relationships, in reading between the lines where others saw only numbers. My gaze drifted to the skyline. Chicago stretched endlessly beyond the windows, indifferent, unaware that someone new was beginning to shape the currents under the surface. I began drafting emails to the top clients I had personally nurtured at Veltrix, carefully phrasing each line to communicate continuity and commitment without betraying the upheaval behind the scenes. To each one, I reminded them of past successes, shared minor updates that reflected my insight, and promised careful attention to their needs. Every sentence was deliberate. Each word carried weight. Marcus looked up from his laptop. "You never stop," he said. "I do not. This is the beginning," I replied. We spent the morning coordinating the first outreach to the clients who had expressed concern after reading the article Linda had published. Their responses were polite but curious. Many asked for clarifications, reassurances, and immediate consultations. I scheduled calls, created preliminary agendas, and outlined the frameworks for discussions without revealing the full depth of the strategy I intended to pursue. The hour passed unnoticed. The energy in the office shifted from tense anticipation to controlled momentum. By mid-morning, Nexus Automotive called. Their assistant, polite and precise, asked to speak with me. I took the call and guided the conversation with care, acknowledging the history of collaboration while presenting the promise of the future. They were concerned about the disruptions at Veltrix, but reassured by my continued involvement. I set a meeting for the next day, ensuring that every detail from logistics to cultural considerations was prepared. The call ended with a sense of mutual understanding. Shortly after, Raventech contacted me. Their tone was urgent but measured. I listened carefully, validated their concerns, and confirmed a strategy session within the week. Each of these interactions reinforced the reality that my professional reputation had not been diminished by the dismissal. Connor's misjudgment, his misunderstanding of the value of cultural intelligence, had opened doors I could now walk through with confidence. Lunch passed almost unnoticed. I ate a sandwich while reviewing internal notes, matching previous client communications with new priorities, and identifying which tasks could be accelerated without risking credibility. Connor's error lay in haste. My advantage lay in careful, deliberate action. By late afternoon, Sarah called to check in. I briefed her on client responses, staff onboarding, and operational setup. Her voice was calm but incisive, guiding adjustments that would save time later. "Everything you need is in place," she said. "Do not let impatience undo what you have already built." I thanked her, feeling the weight of responsibility shift slightly, but with a sense of control I had not felt in months. As evening approached, I spread contracts across my desk, reviewing each clause, each signature, each timeline. The lessons of 15 years of negotiation, diplomacy, and cultural insight were embedded in every line. The years of experience I had honed were now tools I could wield freely. The office lights reflected in the windows, casting the room in a glow that made the papers look heavier, more consequential than their physical weight. Marcus worked quietly beside me, organizing additional client folders, making sure no detail was overlooked. I reviewed the coming week, morning calls with top-tier clients, midday strategy meetings with new hires, afternoons reserved for drafting proposals and internal analysis. Every action was mapped, measured, and purposeful. I had chosen the quiet fight, a battle waged with patience, intelligence, and precision. That night, my phone rang. It was Kyoto International, Mr. Takahashi himself. His subject line was simple: confirming your availability for an initial strategy session. I replied immediately, proposing a time and location that allowed for focused, uninterrupted discussion. The response was prompt, acknowledged, confirmed, appreciative. It was not just validation. It was a signal. We were moving, the clients were moving with us, and Connor remained unaware that the foundation of trust had already shifted. That evening, I walked home through streets slick with melting snow. The city smelled faintly of exhaust and bread, a mixture of human activity and warmth. I welcomed the weight of my coat and the bite of cold air against my face. Each step was deliberate, each breath measured. I reviewed the operational plan for the next week in my mind: calls, strategy sessions, proposals, internal reviews. I marked potential weak points and identified opportunities created by Connor's ignorance. By the time I reached my loft, I had settled into a rhythm. I placed Sarah's folder of incorporation papers in the center of the desk. The stack of contracts beside it gleamed under the lamp. Each represented a promise, a responsibility, a tool of leverage. I reviewed the week's schedule again, mapping where I would act, observe, and let others move while I collected intelligence. This was the quiet war I had chosen, deliberate and precise. The city outside had grown quiet. The river mirrored the sky, steel and gold mingling in shifting patterns. I placed a single note atop the contracts. Begin. It was not a proclamation. It was a plan. The quiet fight had begun, and I was ready to shape the course of the weeks to come. I leaned back, letting my gaze rest on the reflection in the window. I saw a woman poised at the edge of a challenge larger than any she had faced before. Confidence, steady and measured, filled the space where doubt had once lingered. Connor had not ended me. He had created an opening. The question was no longer if I would succeed, but how decisively I would claim what had always been mine. The following morning, I arrived at the office before sunrise. The street outside was quiet, lit only by street lamps reflecting off patches of melting snow. I unlocked the door and stepped inside, the space still dark except for the faint glow from my laptop screen. Marcus was already setting up, reviewing emails that had arrived overnight. He looked up at me and gave a small nod. I returned it. We did not need to speak. The rhythm of work had begun. I poured coffee, the aroma filling the room and anchoring me, giving a tangible weight to the decisions I was about to make. I opened my notebook and began drafting the week's schedule. The first priority was client outreach. Each call, each meeting, each email needed precision. Any misstep could signal weakness. Connor had underestimated me once. I would not give him a second chance. By mid-morning, the first client meeting commenced. It was with Nexus Automotive. I spoke calmly, clearly, translating technical details across cultural boundaries, ensuring every term, every implication was understood. Marcus took notes silently, capturing subtleties I could not focus on in real time. The clients listened, attentive, their initial apprehension dissolving as they recognized familiarity in my voice, authority in my presence. The meeting concluded with a promise of ongoing collaboration. I made a mental note of each nuance, each hesitation, each subtle expression of concern. These were the pieces I would use to build strategy. Shortly after, Raven Tech called. Their tone carried urgency and underlying skepticism. I acknowledged their concerns and outlined a roadmap for problem-solving. Every statement was deliberate, every promise measured. By the end of the call, they were reassured, a subtle shift in their tone revealing trust. These early victories were not dramatic, not loud, but each one laid another brick in the foundation of Doyle's strategies. By late afternoon, Sarah checked in. She reminded me of deadlines, legal compliance, and operational requirements. Each adjustment she suggested was minor but critical. Her guidance allowed me to focus on strategy rather than logistics. The efficiency we gained was multiplied by our careful planning. I noted everything in my notebook, mapping a timeline that integrated client interactions, internal reviews, and hiring. That evening, I walked through the city streets, letting the energy of movement and sound absorb into me. I felt the city's pulse, noticing small patterns, the rhythm of pedestrian crossings, the way deliveries were scheduled, the subtle differences in conversations between locals and tourists. These observations, seemingly trivial, would inform how we approached client engagements and internal operations. Returning to the office, I reviewed contracts and correspondence. I examined each line, ensuring alignment with strategy and compliance. Every clause, every signature, every date was a thread in a tapestry of intent and security. The next few days blurred into a controlled frenzy. I met with potential hires, each interview carefully structured to assess skill, temperament, and alignment with our company culture. Marcus handled the logistics while I focused on evaluating judgment and foresight. By the end of the week, 2 key analysts had joined us. They were precise, analytical, and loyal. Their addition allowed us to handle multiple client engagements simultaneously without compromising quality or attention to detail. The following Tuesday, I traveled to a neutral location for a preliminary meeting with Kyoto International. The room was smaller than the one I had been dismissed from, but its significance was larger. I presented my strategy clearly, emphasizing cultural intelligence, patience, and precision. The Japanese delegation observed carefully. Mr. Takahashi tested my proposals with pointed questions. I answered each with clarity and depth, demonstrating understanding and respect for their operational philosophy. By the meeting's conclusion, it was clear they valued the continuity I offered and the attention I had dedicated to building trust over years. Returning to the office, I reviewed the contracts that had arrived from new client agreements. Each one was carefully executed, aligned with our strategic approach. I noted terms, timelines, and conditions, preparing for seamless integration into our operational plan. Marcus and I cross-referenced all documentation with prior client interactions to ensure no details were overlooked. The precision of our work was becoming a competitive advantage, a silent message to those who had dismissed or underestimated us. Late that week, another unexpected email arrived from Veltrix. Connor had sent an internal memo criticizing prior management and blaming cultural misunderstandings for delays. It was a blunder. I printed the memo and placed it in the evidence folder, not for litigation, but for strategic reference. The arrogance and misjudgment it revealed would become leverage in the weeks to come. I reviewed every detail, noting inconsistencies, overstatements, and gaps. These would inform negotiations and client reassurances. By Friday, the office was humming. Calls, emails, and internal planning overlapped seamlessly. We had 3 active client projects underway and 2 more awaiting confirmations. I reviewed the progress with Marcus, adjusting priorities and delegating tasks. The office felt alive, each decision reinforcing our credibility and control. I watched our strategy unfold, quiet but inexorable, a sequence of deliberate actions shaping outcomes before they could be manipulated externally. That evening, I returned home, reviewing the week's achievements. The contracts signed, the meetings conducted, the hires finalized all represented tangible evidence of momentum. I reflected on the week's work and the subtle shifts in client perception. The arc of trust, once disrupted by Connor's arrogance, was now being restored under our careful guidance. I made notes for the coming week: priority meetings, risk assessments, strategy updates, internal training. Each point was deliberate, each action measured. The quiet war I had chosen was gaining ground, and I was preparing for the critical moments that would determine whether we remained ahead. The first week of operations had been demanding but successful. The foundation was solid. The next moves would require the same attention to detail, patience, and strategic foresight. I reviewed the schedule one last time, placing a single mark in my notebook: observe, adjust, execute. The mantra was simple but powerful. It guided the day's decisions and framed the approach for the future. Connor Blake had underestimated patience, underestimated relationships, and underestimated me. Each misstep he made would now be a building block for our success. The quiet fight continued, deliberate, controlled, and unrelenting. The morning light filtered into the office, pale and cold, but it carried a sense of anticipation I could not ignore. I poured coffee, feeling the warmth in my hands, and looked at the stacks of files from the previous week. Each contract, each email, each note was a thread in the network I had begun weaving. Marcus arrived minutes later, already scanning incoming correspondence. His eyes flicked to mine, and we shared a silent understanding. Today was the day we would test the foundation we had built. The first email of the day was from Kyoto International. The subject line was simple: request for immediate consultation. My pulse quickened, not from anxiety but from recognition. They were reaching out, not Veltrix. They had chosen to bypass the company that had dismissed me in front of their delegation, instead seeking the insight of the person who understood them best. I called Marcus over, and we went through the correspondence together. I read each line aloud, noting the subtle references that revealed trust and preference. "They remember how we handled the last shipment," I said. "They value continuity over brand." Marcus nodded. He understood the significance without needing further explanation. This was the first tangible manifestation of the twist we had anticipated, the moment where being dismissed had created opportunity. I drafted a response, carefully crafting language that was professional yet personal. It emphasized familiarity, attention to detail, and a commitment to understanding their unique needs. No mention of Veltrix. No mention of Connor Blake. Just an offer of guidance, support, and partnership. The email sent, I leaned back, feeling a weight lift. The stage was set. By mid-morning, the first call came in. Mr. Takahashi himself. I greeted him warmly, establishing rapport immediately, and guided the discussion through the complexities of their upcoming operational timeline. He asked pointed questions, testing both my knowledge and my patience. I responded with clarity, providing solutions that balanced efficiency with cultural sensitivity. At the end of the call, he confirmed a meeting for the following day. Marcus prepared the meeting room meticulously. The table was cleared, chairs arranged precisely, presentation materials aligned. I reviewed each document, memorizing key figures, client histories, and potential concerns. Preparation had always been my advantage, and now it was a weapon. The meeting commenced. Mr. Takahashi, Ms. Yamamoto, and 2 other senior representatives arrived punctually. I began with context, weaving historical interactions with proposed solutions. The Japanese delegation listened intently, noting subtleties in phrasing, tone, and emphasis. Connor's missteps were evident even in absentia. His previous attempts had disregarded nuance, and the contrast with our approach was unmistakable. By the conclusion of the session, I had secured a preliminary agreement on project scope and expectations. The delegation expressed appreciation for the depth of understanding and the attention to detail. It was clear they preferred continuity with the person they trusted over the corporate identity that had discarded her. Later that afternoon, Marcus and I reviewed the outcomes. We noted the shift in client sentiment, the subtle acknowledgement of our credibility, and the opening of opportunities previously closed. I marked in my notebook, twist executed, leverage established. The quiet war was gaining momentum. The following day, I received inquiries from other clients who had read Linda's article. They sought insight, reassurance, and engagement. I responded methodically, prioritizing communication while ensuring that each interaction reinforced trust and demonstrated capability. The misjudgment Connor had made, assuming volume and authority could replace knowledge and relationship building, was now our advantage. By evening, I returned to my loft. The city lights reflected in the river, shimmering like strands of opportunity. I reviewed notes from the meetings, client responses, and internal observations. Each detail was a thread in the tapestry I was weaving, each observation a potential advantage. The twist had created a shift in the landscape. I was no longer the dismissed executive. I was the preferred consultant, the bridge, the reliable constant. I drafted a strategy for the week ahead, integrating client follow-ups, internal planning, and contingency measures. The office hummed with quiet activity as Marcus organized files and correspondence. The rhythm was deliberate, steady, unrelenting. Each move was calculated, each step preparing for the next opportunity. The culmination of the day came in an unexpected email. One of the executives I had contacted independently responded, expressing eagerness to engage directly with Doyle's strategies. They referenced past projects, personal interactions, and the trust that had been cultivated outside Veltrix's corporate framework. The message was brief, but it carried immense significance, the first proof that our twist had shifted the narrative entirely. I allowed myself a small smile, leaning back in my chair. Connor had thought dismissal equaled elimination. He had underestimated relationships, preparation, and the power of trust. He had inadvertently created the conditions for the very outcome he sought to prevent. That night, as I sat by the window overlooking the river, I reflected on the events of the past week. The twist had not been dramatic in the traditional sense. It had been subtle, a shift in perception, a quiet redirection of allegiance. But its impact was profound. The clients, the partners, the people who mattered most, had chosen me. The dismissal had been the catalyst, the opportunity hidden within the apparent setback. I prepared my notes for the next day. Calls to clients, review of internal operations, meetings to brief our new hires. Each action would reinforce trust, demonstrate reliability, and solidify our position. The twist had provided leverage. It was now up to us to convert that leverage into tangible advantage. Marcus glanced up from his work. "They are responding positively," he said. "Emails, confirmations, acknowledgments." "Yes," I replied, "and this is only the beginning." I stood and looked out over the city, its lights reflecting off the river like pathways illuminated for the taking. The twist had been executed. The game was ours to play. The quiet war continued, but now with momentum, confidence, and the unmistakable proof that being underestimated was the greatest advantage of all. The next morning, the office was quiet except for the hum of computers and the occasional click of a keyboard. Marcus was already reviewing emails and preparing folders for the first set of client calls. I poured coffee and took a deep breath, letting the aroma center my thoughts. Today would be about follow-ups, consolidation, and leveraging the momentum we had gained. The twist from the previous week had shifted the landscape. Clients were responding, inquiries were arriving, and even former allies at Veltrix seemed to recognize the change in authority. I began with personalized emails to each client who had expressed interest after reading Linda's article. Every sentence was crafted to reinforce continuity and reliability, emphasizing that Doyle Strategies offered expertise and attention that the corporate entity could no longer provide. Marcus handled the logistical details, ensuring each document, attachment, and link was correctly aligned with the client's history and expectations. The first call was with Kyoto International. Mr. Takahashi led the conversation, asking precise questions about timelines, operational risk, and coordination with multiple offices across continents. I answered carefully, emphasizing efficiency balanced with cultural respect. He tested my knowledge, probing for gaps or uncertainty. I responded with clarity, citing previous experiences, highlighting contingency plans, and offering options for scenario management. By the end of the call, a sense of mutual respect had been established, and the preliminary agreement moved forward. I noted in my notebook, trust reinforced, relationship strengthened. Immediately following, I addressed 2 other clients who had recently engaged through referrals or independent interest. Each conversation required delicate calibration. One client had concerns about delivery schedules and adherence to regulatory standards. I walked them through a structured plan, addressing every potential point of hesitation. By the conclusion, they agreed to a formal engagement. The second client, a technology firm with an international supply chain, expressed interest in a strategic partnership. I provided initial frameworks and promised a follow-up strategy session within the week. Between calls, I reviewed correspondence from Veltrix. Connor's internal memos and emails continued to circulate, now inadvertently highlighting his lack of understanding of the cultural and operational nuances critical to the projects. I printed and organized the documents for reference, not for litigation, but to anticipate potential missteps and prepare counter-strategies. Each example of arrogance, miscommunication, or mismanagement became a tool, a subtle advantage in the broader negotiation landscape. By midday, Marcus and I conducted an internal review with our new hires. I briefed them on client histories, operational frameworks, and the strategic importance of the twist we had capitalized on. Each employee understood their role in reinforcing trust, maintaining precision, and observing opportunities for further influence. We simulated client scenarios, discussing potential objections, responses, and escalation paths. By the end of the session, the team operated with synchronicity, aware of both the immediate goals and the overarching strategic objectives. Lunch passed with quiet deliberation. I ate while reviewing notes, mapping the sequences of communication that would maintain momentum with each client. I adjusted priorities, noting which meetings required immediate attention and which could be approached methodically. The rhythm of preparation and execution had become second nature. The afternoon brought another set of client calls, confirmations, and engagements. Each interaction was carefully documented, ensuring every nuance, promise, and observation was recorded. By the end of the day, we had secured preliminary agreements with 3 additional clients, all reflecting a shift in perception. Doyle Strategies was now recognized as a competent, reliable, and culturally intelligent alternative to Veltrix. Evening arrived and I returned to my loft, reviewing the day's outcomes. The contracts signed, the meetings conducted, and the observations made provided a clear map of the week ahead. I prepared notes for tomorrow, strategy sessions with clients, internal review of ongoing projects, and contingency planning for potential interference from Veltrix. Each item reinforced the principles guiding our quiet war: patience, precision, and leverage. Later that night, I received an email from an unexpected source. One of the executives who had been skeptical initially expressed eagerness to engage directly with Doyle Strategies. Their message referenced previous collaborations and acknowledged the trust built over time. The significance was immediate. The twist had been fully realized. The clients who mattered most had recognized the continuity, expertise, and reliability that Veltrix had ignored. I noted in my planner, leverage secured. Momentum established. I spent hours reviewing internal operations, aligning team tasks, and ensuring every client touchpoint was consistent with our strategy. Each adjustment, each refinement, reinforced our position and mitigated risk. The office was quiet now, the hum of computers the only sound accompanying the occasional shuffle of Marcus reviewing notes. I reflected on the week. The twist had shifted the perception of authority, credibility, and trust. The dismissal had created opportunity, and the careful execution of follow-ups, meetings, and strategy had transformed that opportunity into tangible advantage. Before bed, I reviewed the contracts again, noting deadlines, contingencies, and obligations. I made annotations in the margins, reminders for the team, and adjustments to the projected schedules. The quiet fight had grown louder in significance, though it remained unseen by those who believed power was measured by position alone. Connor had made the mistake of equating authority with competence. He had underestimated the value of trust, relationships, and careful strategy. Each misstep he had taken had now become a building block for Doyle Strategies. I placed the folder containing Veltrix internal communications beside the notebook. The documents were not for public consumption, nor for immediate action. They were intelligence, evidence, and foresight. Each time I reviewed them, I gleaned insights into weaknesses that could be leveraged in future negotiations. Preparation, I reminded myself, was as much a weapon as strategy. The city outside my window was quiet, the river reflecting the scattered lights like strands of opportunity. I took a deep breath, feeling the weight of both responsibility and possibility. The twist had been executed. The foundation had been laid. The next phase would require careful observation, calculated action, and unwavering focus. The quiet war had been initiated, and momentum was now firmly in our hands. As I closed the laptop and leaned back, I allowed myself a brief moment of satisfaction. The twist was no longer theoretical. It had shifted the narrative entirely. Clients had responded, trust had been reaffirmed, and Doyle Strategies had established a presence that could not be ignored. I looked out over the city lights, envisioning the weeks to come, knowing that the careful steps we had taken would guide the company toward greater opportunities. Tomorrow, I reminded myself, would bring the next challenge. But for now, the first move had been executed flawlessly, and the results were undeniable. Connor Blake had underestimated patience, preparation, and subtlety. Each advantage he had ignored was now mine to wield. The quiet war continued, deliberate, unrelenting, and increasingly decisive. The office was alive in a way it had never been before. Morning sunlight poured through the windows, illuminating folders, laptops, and a whiteboard scrawled with plans, deadlines, and client notes. Marcus arrived first, as usual, already sorting emails, reviewing files, and organizing the priorities I had outlined the night before. I poured coffee, feeling the warmth seep through my hands, and opened my notebook. Each page was filled with client data, operational checklists, and strategy notes. Today was about execution, but also about expansion. Doyle Strategies was no longer a fledgling operation. It was becoming a structured, credible firm. The first task was recruitment. We had 2 new analysts on board, but additional expertise was necessary. I scheduled interviews with 3 candidates recommended by trusted colleagues. Each candidate would undergo a rigorous process, evaluating not just skill and experience, but judgment, cultural understanding, and alignment with our philosophy of trust-based client management. I reviewed each resume, highlighting areas of strength and potential concern, preparing questions that would reveal both technical skill and strategic thinking. Marcus and I coordinated the interviews, mapping time slots to allow sufficient reflection after each session. Before the first interview, I prepared briefing notes on our client portfolio. I reviewed communications with Toyota, Nexus Automotive, and Raventech, noting subtleties in tone, hesitation, and enthusiasm. I reminded myself and Marcus that small details mattered. Phrases, punctuation, and the cadence of responses all conveyed more than explicit content. The candidates arrived sequentially, punctual, composed, but each carrying their own nervous energy. I began with introductions, sharing the history of Doyle strategies, the principles guiding our operations, and the expectations for the role. Then I posed scenarios based on real client interactions. I observed how each candidate responded under pressure, whether they prioritized listening or action, and how they balanced caution with initiative. By the end of the morning, I had identified one candidate who demonstrated exceptional judgment, another who excelled in analytical thinking, and a third who showed a unique capacity for cross-cultural communication. I made notes for Marcus to follow up with tailored offers. Between interviews, client emails arrived in waves. Toyota requested clarification on project milestones, while Nexus asked for a refined proposal regarding operational risk management. I drafted responses with care, ensuring language was precise, culturally sensitive, and conveyed confidence. Marcus prepared supporting documents, aligning schedules and formatting reports. Each action was deliberate, reinforcing trust and showcasing the professionalism of the firm. Lunch was brief. I reviewed the initial projections for revenue, staffing, and operational capacity. While the numbers were important, my focus was on relationships. Each client interaction was an opportunity to deepen trust, demonstrate understanding, and anticipate challenges. Connor's prior missteps had created openings, but they required careful attention to convert opportunity into tangible advantage. In the afternoon, we conducted the first team strategy session. The newly recruited analysts, alongside Marcus, gathered around the table. I presented an overview of ongoing projects, client expectations, and strategic priorities. We discussed potential risks, contingency plans, and the importance of maintaining consistent, high-quality communication. Questions were asked, scenarios debated, and solutions proposed. I guided the discussion, allowing team members to contribute insights while reinforcing key principles. By the end of the session, everyone understood not only their responsibilities, but also the broader vision of Doyle's strategies. Following the strategy meeting, I had back-to-back client calls. With Toyota, I presented detailed workflows, highlighting points of efficiency and reliability, addressing concerns raised in prior communications. The delegation asked probing questions, testing our ability to anticipate challenges. I responded with clarity and confidence, illustrating solutions informed by years of experience and a nuanced understanding of their operational culture. By the call's conclusion, the preliminary agreement advanced further, signaling trust and alignment. Next, Nexus Automotive requested a call to discuss integration of a new supply chain protocol. I guided the conversation, outlining risks, mitigation strategies, and anticipated outcomes. I emphasized collaboration, adaptability, and responsiveness. Each detail was noted, documented, and communicated internally for follow-up. Marcus prepared a brief for the team, ensuring alignment across all touchpoints. Evening arrived, and I returned to my loft. The city lights reflected in the river, shifting with the current. I reviewed the day's progress. Hires finalized, client calls completed, documents prepared, and internal strategies aligned. Each action reinforced Doyle's strategies, credibility, and demonstrated our ability to execute precisely and consistently. I updated the notebook, mapping outcomes, noting opportunities, and planning next steps. The twist from the previous week continued to influence the narrative. Clients recognized expertise and reliability that Veltrix could no longer provide. The dismissal, which had seemed a setback, had created a competitive advantage. I reminded myself that trust, once lost, could be regained only through consistent demonstration of competence and understanding. Doyle Strategies was now proving that principle in action. Before bed, I reviewed contracts, correspondence, and internal notes. I marked priority items for tomorrow, ensuring nothing would be overlooked. Every detail, every interaction, every decision was a building block. I reflected on the week. The firm was growing, clients were responding, and the foundation of trust was solidifying. The quiet war continued, deliberate, precise, and increasingly decisive. Connor Blake had underestimated the importance of subtlety, preparation, and cultural intelligence. Each advantage he had ignored was now ours to wield strategically. I closed my notebook and looked out the window. The city stretched endlessly, illuminated by streetlights and building reflections, a tapestry of opportunities waiting to be navigated. Doyle Strategies was no longer an experiment. It was a living, growing entity. The next week would bring additional challenges, meetings, and negotiations. The twist had provided momentum, but it was our execution, vigilance, and foresight that would determine the extent of our success. I poured myself a cup of tea, letting the warmth settle, and allowed a brief moment of quiet satisfaction. The path ahead was long, but it was ours. The quiet war had become visible, and the first tangible victories had been achieved. The morning arrived with pale sunlight streaming into the office, casting long lines across the polished wood and the stacks of files neatly arranged on the desk. Marcus was already at his station, scanning through emails and organizing documents for the day's meetings. I poured myself coffee, feeling the warmth anchor my thoughts, and opened my notebook to review the agenda. Today was about execution and consolidation. Doyle Strategies was growing, but growth without precision could unravel even the most carefully constructed plans. The first priority was client follow-ups. Coyote International had sent additional questions overnight regarding integration timelines and contingency plans. I reviewed each note carefully, cross-referencing past communications and internal data. I drafted responses that balanced reassurance with clarity, demonstrating not just competence but foresight. Each sentence was crafted to convey reliability and respect, a subtle assertion of authority without confrontation. Marcus prepared supporting documents and scheduled follow-up calls, ensuring every detail was aligned. By mid-morning, the first call began. Mr. Takahashi led, presenting questions that tested both technical understanding and cultural sensitivity. I answered methodically, drawing on prior experience and nuanced insight into operational protocols. Each clarification reinforced the confidence the delegation had placed in me. They acknowledged our approach, noting the consistency and thoughtfulness in our communication. The preliminary agreement advanced further, signaling trust and alignment. Between calls, I met with the two new analysts and Marcus to review progress on internal projects. We discussed client onboarding, documentation accuracy, and strategic priorities. I emphasized the importance of attention to detail and consistency in communication, explaining how subtle missteps could undermine credibility. The team absorbed the guidance, offering insights and identifying potential challenges. By the end of the session, roles were clearly defined, and responsibilities were assigned with precision. Lunch was a quiet affair. I reviewed proposals for upcoming client engagements, noting potential gaps and refining language for clarity and persuasion. Each proposal was designed to reinforce trust, demonstrate expertise, and anticipate client needs. The missteps made by Connor Blake at Veltrix, his overconfidence, lack of cultural understanding, and disregard for relationship building, had created opportunities, but exploiting them required careful calculation. The afternoon brought successive client meetings. Nexus Automotive requested a session to discuss risk management in supply chain integration. I led the discussion, outlining a clear, culturally sensitive plan that addressed their concerns while demonstrating proactive problem-solving. The response was positive. Raven Tech followed, seeking consultation on scaling operations across multiple regions. I provided structured recommendations, emphasizing collaboration and adaptability. Marcus documented each interaction meticulously, ensuring that no detail was overlooked. By late afternoon, we had secured preliminary agreements with additional clients, reinforcing Doyle Strategies' growing credibility. The twist from previous interactions had begun to manifest fully. Clients were recognizing competence, reliability, and a depth of understanding that Veltrix could no longer claim. Each interaction reinforced our position, subtly reshaping the landscape in our favor. That evening, I returned to my loft overlooking the river. The city lights reflected on the water, shifting with the current like threads of opportunity waiting to be navigated. I reviewed the day's accomplishments: contracts signed, meetings conducted, internal tasks aligned. Each action was a deliberate step in consolidating trust and demonstrating reliability. I updated my notebook, mapping outcomes and planning next steps. The quiet war we had initiated was gaining momentum. Later, I received an unexpected email from a skeptical executive who had previously questioned our approach. The message expressed interest in engaging directly with Doyle's strategies, citing trust built over past interactions and recognition of our consistent performance. The twist had created tangible results, validating the strategy and proving that the dismissal, once perceived as a setback, had transformed into opportunity. I spent hours refining operational procedures, aligning team responsibilities, and ensuring that client interactions remained consistent with our strategic vision. Each adjustment reinforced credibility and mitigated potential risks. By focusing on detail, maintaining high standards, and executing precisely, we were solidifying the firm's reputation. As night fell, I reflected on the week. The company was no longer an experiment. It was a living, growing entity. Clients had responded positively, our team was aligned and capable, and the foundation of trust was firmly established. The next phase would require vigilance, adaptability, and strategic foresight to sustain momentum and convert opportunity into lasting success. I closed my notebook and looked out over the city. The streets glimmered with reflections from the river, a tapestry of potential engagements and possibilities. Doyle's strategies had survived the first challenge. Now, with careful execution and measured strategy, it was poised to expand influence, deepen client trust, and prepare for the next phase of the quiet war that would test both competence and resolve. The first tangible victories had been achieved, but the real battle lay ahead. Connor Blake had underestimated patience, preparation, and the power of relationships. Each misstep he had made was now an advantage we could leverage. The quiet war continued, deliberate, methodical, and increasingly decisive. The office was unusually quiet that morning. Outside, the city stirred with the hum of early traffic, but inside, Doyle's strategies hummed with anticipation. Marcus was already reviewing emails, his fingers flying across the keyboard as he organized the incoming correspondence. I poured coffee and reviewed the day's agenda. Today was about consolidation, but also vigilance. We had momentum, but with attention now focused on our growing influence, the slightest misstep could be costly. The first email was from Linda, the journalist. Her tone was sharp and curiosity bristled between the lines. She had been following Veltrix and Connor Blake closely. "Rowan," she wrote, "the board is reacting. There is chatter about a shakeup and whispers of mismanagement are surfacing. Can you comment off the record?" I responded carefully, emphasizing insight without exposure. I maintained professionalism, recognizing that media engagement was a tool, not a weapon. Marcus compiled an internal report on Veltrix's public communications, tracking inconsistencies and missteps in their messaging. Connor's attempts to assert control were evident, but the errors he made in tone, substance, and cultural awareness were even more pronounced under scrutiny. I reviewed the report, noting how each misjudgment could be leveraged subtly in negotiations and client communications. The office felt like a chessboard, every move calculated, every oversight an opening. The first client call of the day was with Kyoto International. Mr. Takahashi and his team joined promptly. The discussion focused on the operational timeline, integration strategies, and risk mitigation. I responded with clarity, referencing contingency plans and prior experience, demonstrating both reliability and foresight. Each question from the delegation was met with an answer that balanced precision with diplomacy. By the end, they expressed confidence in our approach, subtly reinforcing the preference for Doyle's strategies over Veltrix. Between calls, I met with the analysts and Marcus to review documentation for potential legal and operational issues. Veltrix had begun circulating internal memos critical of our approach, an attempt to undermine confidence and assert influence. We reviewed each document carefully, identifying inaccuracies and misrepresentations. This intelligence would serve as a guide for proactive client reassurance and strategic positioning. Lunch was brief. I ate while reviewing correspondence and planning follow-up communications. Each message was crafted to reinforce credibility, maintain transparency, and project confidence. Connor's missteps were now part of the record, a cautionary tale that demonstrated the contrast between arrogance and strategic intelligence. The afternoon was consumed with client meetings and internal strategy sessions. Nexus Automotive requested a detailed discussion on supply chain integration. I presented a structured plan, addressing all concerns, while Marcus documented the conversation meticulously. We reviewed feedback in real time, adjusting proposals and timelines. Each adjustment strengthened client confidence and positioned Doyle Strategies as a precise and culturally aware alternative. Raven Tech followed, seeking consultation on expanding operations internationally. I provided a comprehensive overview, demonstrating both technical expertise and nuanced understanding of regional challenges. Questions were posed, scenarios discussed, and solutions proposed. By the conclusion, the client indicated trust in our ability to deliver, reinforcing the growing reputation of the firm. Late afternoon, I reviewed additional memos from Veltrix. Connor's communications revealed escalating concern and growing recklessness. Mismanagement and cultural insensitivity were documented, providing both insight and potential leverage. I annotated each point, mapping strategies to preempt client concerns and strengthen our position. Marcus prepared a summary report for internal review. By evening, the office was still. The city outside shimmered under the streetlights, reflected in the river like ribbons of opportunity. I reviewed contracts, meeting notes, and operational plans. The day's efforts had solidified client trust, aligned the team, and positioned us to anticipate potential interference from Veltrix. Each step reinforced the quiet war, deliberate, calculated, and increasingly decisive. Before leaving, I made notes for the following day. Calls, strategy reviews, and client engagements were prioritized. Potential risks were mapped, and contingency plans drafted. I reflected on the week's achievements. Doyle Strategies was no longer a fledgling operation. It was a credible, growing firm with momentum, influence, and strategic advantage. Connor Blake's underestimation of patience, preparation, and the power of trust had created openings that we had now fully exploited. As I walked home, the wind sharp against my face, I allowed myself a brief sense of satisfaction. The quiet war was progressing exactly as planned. The firm's credibility had grown, clients were responsive, and every misstep by Veltrix reinforced our position. Tomorrow would bring more challenges, but the foundation was strong, and the trajectory was clear. The stage was set for the next phase, where precision, vigilance, and strategic foresight would determine the ultimate outcome. The next morning, sunlight slanted through the office windows, illuminating folders, reports, and the whiteboard scrawled with deadlines, client notes, and strategy points. Marcus was already reviewing emails and preparing files for the day's meetings. I poured coffee and reviewed the agenda. Today was about execution, vigilance, and reinforcing our position. Doyle Strategies had momentum, but with attention now focused on our growing influence, precision was paramount. The first client call was with Kyoto International. Mr. Takahashi and his delegation joined punctually. I greeted them warmly, acknowledging previous discussions while framing today's session around forward-looking solutions. Questions came swiftly and with precision. I answered each with clarity, providing alternatives, contingencies, and context. The delegation listened, noting the alignment between past commitments and current proposals. By the end, their confidence in our firm had strengthened. Between calls, I reviewed Veltrix internal communications. Connor's memos and emails were circulating, criticizing prior management and suggesting that past delays were due to the previous leadership's incompetence. Each document revealed arrogance, misjudgment, and a lack of cultural awareness. Marcus and I annotated these materials, identifying patterns that could predict missteps and guide client reassurance. This intelligence became a tool, allowing us to anticipate concerns and craft proactive communication. Later, we conducted an internal review with our team. New hires joined, ready to engage with client projects. I briefed them on the firm's priorities, ongoing projects, and strategic objectives. Scenarios were discussed and potential risks analyzed. I emphasized the importance of consistent messaging, precise execution, and attention to subtle client cues. By the end of the session, the team operated with cohesion, each member understanding both immediate responsibilities and long-term objectives. Lunch was brief, consumed while reviewing proposals and prioritizing tasks. Each document was scrutinized for clarity, consistency, and cultural sensitivity. Connor's missteps at Veltrix, overconfidence, lack of insight, and disregard for relationship building were now evident to clients and became leverage for Doyle's strategies. I mapped potential outcomes, ensuring each action reinforced credibility and trust. In the afternoon, Nexus Automotive requested a detailed consultation. I outlined strategies for risk management, contingency planning, and cross-regional coordination. Every point was supported by data, client history, and prior experience. Marcus documented each element, preparing for follow-up reports and internal alignment. The client responded positively, indicating trust and willingness to proceed with our recommendations. Raventech followed, seeking guidance on operational expansion. I provided structured proposals, addressing potential challenges and solutions. Questions tested our foresight, but every answer was precise and backed by actionable plans. By the conclusion, the client expressed confidence in our ability to deliver, further strengthening Doyle's strategies' credibility. As the day progressed, additional client inquiries arrived, many referencing Linda's article and expressing interest in direct engagement with Doyle's strategies. I prioritized these communications, ensuring timely and thoughtful responses. Each interaction reinforced our reputation and subtly highlighted the contrast between our approach and the missteps of Veltrix leadership. By evening, the office was quiet. I reviewed the day's activities, contracts, and correspondence. Momentum had been maintained, trust reinforced, and strategic positioning strengthened. I noted opportunities for the next day, mapping follow-ups, strategy sessions, and internal reviews. Each decision was deliberate, reinforcing Doyle's strategies' growing influence. Later, I reflected on the week. The firm was no longer experimental. It had established credibility, secured client trust, and demonstrated consistent execution. The quiet war continued, measured and precise. Connor Blake's underestimation of patience, preparation, and relational intelligence had created openings now fully leveraged. The groundwork was laid for the next stage, where careful observation, strategic action, and timing would culminate in a decisive advantage. I closed my notebook, glanced at Marcus working diligently at his desk, and took a moment to let the weight of accomplishment settle. The first tangible victories had been achieved. Clients were engaged, the team aligned, and the operational framework was robust. The twist we had exploited had shifted perceptions, and Doyle's strategies had established a position that could not be ignored. As I stepped out of the office into the night air, I felt the city stretch before me, its lights reflecting off the river like pathways of opportunity. Each choice, each interaction, each strategy was now a brick in a foundation that would support both growth and influence. The quiet war was far from over, but Doyle's strategies had not only survived the first challenge, it had emerged stronger, poised, and ready for the battles that lay ahead. The morning light spilled across the office like a promise. I poured coffee, letting the warmth settle in my hands and sharpen my focus. Marcus was already scanning emails, noting anything urgent or unexpected. Today felt different. There was tension in the air, a subtle vibration of anticipation that even the hum of the computers could not mask. Something was about to shift, and I knew it. The first message arrived mid-morning. An email forwarded by Marcus, accidentally sent to the wrong inbox, revealed more than Connor had intended. Internal communications, memos, and spreadsheets all exposed Veltrix's mismanagement, cultural insensitivity, and procedural failures. They had believed the documents private, but the mistakes were now visible to those who mattered. I read through each line carefully, annotating the critical points. There were financial discrepancies, errors in regulatory filings, and references to client dissatisfaction, all of which could be leveraged strategically. I leaned back in my chair, letting the implications sink in. The twist was no longer subtle. The opportunity had become undeniable. Veltrix had miscalculated, overestimated their control, and underestimated me. Every misstep, every arrogance-laden memo was a tool in my hands. Marcus looked up from his notes. "This could be huge," he said. "You can turn it into leverage for the Coyote deal and others." I nodded. "Exactly, but it needs to be precise. We do this right and it will be decisive." I drafted a plan. Step 1, confirm the evidence. Step 2, prepare client communications that reassured them while highlighting the contrast between Doyle's strategies, competence, and Veltrix's failures. Step 3. Execute negotiations, ensuring timing and delivery magnified impact. The first call was to Kyoto International. Mr. Takahashi and his delegation were already in session. I opened with updates on our progress, subtly integrating insights gained from the leaked Veltrix communications without directly referencing the source. The effect was immediate. Questions were posed differently, tone adjusted, and deference subtly shifted toward Doyle's strategies. Trust, which had been building over previous interactions, solidified into tangible authority. After the call, Marcus and I reviewed outcomes. The delegation's response confirmed the plan. The evidence had altered perceptions, reinforced our credibility, and positioned us for a decisive agreement. We documented the responses, noting exactly how each member of the team had reacted. These observations would guide the next round of negotiations. By afternoon, communications from other clients began to arrive. Each reflected awareness of Veltrix's failures, some subtle, some direct. I responded with professionalism, integrating reassurances, solutions, and strategy that leveraged our growing advantage. Contracts that had been tentative now became actionable. Meetings were confirmed. Commitment solidified. The momentum we had cultivated through careful strategy and patience was now unstoppable. Later in the day, Marcus prepared a briefing for the internal team. Analysts reviewed client data, documented discrepancies in Veltrix filings, and prepared reports to guide discussions. Every detail mattered. Timing, phrasing, and delivery would ensure the maximum effect without overt aggression. Doyle's strategies would emerge as competent, reliable, and indispensable. Evening arrived. I reviewed the contracts ready for signature. Kyoto International was poised to formalize the largest engagement in the firm's history. The documents reflected the cumulative work of weeks, strategy sessions, careful correspondence, and meticulous operational planning. Marcus prepared the logistics, ensuring every clause, every deadline, and every contingency was accounted for. I made the call to Kyoto's CEO personally. The conversation was formal, precise, and measured. I outlined deliverables, schedules, and operational oversight. I emphasized continuity, reliability, and the contrast between our approach and previous management errors at Veltrix. The CEO's response was immediate. Confirmation, agreement, signature to follow. The largest contract in Doyle's strategies history was secured. I leaned back in my chair. The twist had become a plot twist. Veltrix's mistakes had created an opening that I had meticulously exploited. Authority had shifted. Trust had been cemented. Momentum had transformed into tangible advantage. Later that night, I reviewed every communication, every annotation, and every signed agreement. The city outside reflected the streetlights in the river, a tapestry of opportunity illuminated for those willing to see it. Doyle's strategies had not just survived the challenge, it had transformed it into a decisive victory. The quiet war had reached a new level, and I stood at the center, poised to guide the next phases with precision and foresight. The first tangible results were complete. The clients were aligned, the contracts executed, and the firm's credibility at its peak. Connor Blake's arrogance, his miscalculations, and underestimation of patience had provided the leverage necessary for a dramatic reversal. The plot twist was complete. Doyle's strategies had claimed not only victory but authority, positioning the firm for further growth and influence. I allowed myself a brief moment of reflection. Every strategic choice, every careful action, every observation had led to this point. The city's lights shimmered against the river, and I felt the quiet satisfaction of a plan executed flawlessly. The battle had been waged with patience, intelligence, and foresight. The firm's position was now unassailable, and the groundwork for the next challenges had been firmly established. The next morning, the office felt charged. The river outside reflected the pale light of dawn, rippling gently as if the city itself acknowledged the shift that had taken place. Marcus was already reviewing emails and organizing documents for the day's negotiations. I poured coffee and reviewed the contracts that were to be finalized. Today would mark the culmination of weeks of careful planning, patient observation, and precise execution. The first task was to confirm final details with Kyoto International. Mr. Takahashi and his team were already on the line. I opened the conversation by reviewing the agreed deliverables, timelines, and operational frameworks. Every word was deliberate, every pause measured. They listened closely, responding with affirmations that indicated trust had solidified. By the end of the call, they confirmed their readiness to execute the contract formally. This was the tangible result of the plot twist, the moment where our patience, strategy, and foresight translated into an unambiguous victory. Marcus prepared the documentation for the signing process, ensuring that every clause, date, and condition was accurate. I reviewed the materials again, double-checking legal compliance, operational feasibility, and client expectations. Every detail mattered. Errors now could undermine the advantage we had gained from the twist. I organized the folder meticulously, noting points for discussion during the signing to reinforce both credibility and trust. Mid-morning brought additional client communications. 2 former clients who had initially hesitated reached out, indicating interest in expanding their contracts. I responded promptly, offering structured proposals and scheduling follow-up strategy sessions. Each interaction reinforced the narrative that Doyle Strategies was reliable, culturally aware, and capable of executing complex projects with precision. Connor Blake's mistakes at Veltrix had inadvertently paved the way for our growing influence, but the execution remained in our hands. By early afternoon, the team assembled for final preparations. Marcus, the analysts, and I reviewed every aspect of the contracts, client expectations, and potential contingencies. We rehearsed responses to possible questions and objections. I emphasized that the firm's credibility depended not only on delivering results, but also on maintaining composure, clarity, and confidence. The team absorbed the guidance, each member aware of their role in ensuring a smooth, professional execution. The signing session began in a formal setting at Kyoto's offices. I presented the contracts, highlighting the agreed terms, timelines, and deliverables. Mr. Takahashi and his colleagues examined each clause carefully. I addressed questions, clarified ambiguities, and reassured them of our commitment. Every observation they made was met with precise, informed responses. By the conclusion of the session, the contracts were signed, marking the largest engagement in Doyle Strategies' history. The firm's authority had been established in a single, decisive moment. After the signing, Marcus and I reviewed the day's communications, preparing follow-up emails and internal notes. Client feedback was overwhelmingly positive, affirming both our strategic decisions and our execution. I documented each interaction, noting subtleties in tone, expression, and response. These observations would guide future negotiations and client relations, reinforcing our strategic advantage. Later, I reviewed the internal Veltrix communications that had been accidentally exposed. The documents revealed ongoing mismanagement, procedural errors, and cultural insensitivity. I annotated each point for internal reference, identifying opportunities to reinforce client trust and highlight the contrast between Doyle Strategies' approach and Veltrix's failures. Marcus compiled a summary, highlighting patterns and insights that would inform future strategy. By evening, the office was quiet. The city outside shimmered with reflected lights, a tapestry of opportunity illuminated in motion. I reviewed the week's progress, contracts executed, clients reassured, team aligned, and strategic positioning secured. Doyle Strategies had transformed an initial setback into a historic victory. The plot twist had been fully realized. Connor Blake's arrogance and miscalculations had created the conditions for a decisive reversal. I took a moment to reflect. Every email, phone call, and meeting had been deliberate. Every observation and decision had been calculated. The firm's credibility was now unassailable. Clients had chosen competence over corporate authority, trust over volume, foresight over arrogance. The foundation for future growth, influence, and success was solid. As night fell, I prepared notes for the next phase: expansion, monitoring, and risk management. Each step would require vigilance and precision. The first tangible victories had been achieved, and the groundwork for sustainable advantage had been laid. Doyle Strategies had not only survived but emerged stronger, more credible, and positioned for continued growth. The quiet war, waged with patience, intelligence, and foresight, had reached a decisive milestone. I looked out the window, the river reflecting the city lights like threads of opportunity. The contracts were signed, the clients aligned, and the team positioned to execute flawlessly. The plot twist was complete, and Doyle Strategies had secured a foundation that would support both influence and expansion. Connor Blake had underestimated patience, preparation, and relational intelligence. The quiet war had reached a turning point, and we had emerged victorious, ready for whatever challenges lay ahead. The morning light in the office felt different that day, almost tangible in its clarity. Sunlight fell across folders, laptops, and neatly aligned documents, illuminating the meticulous order we had created over weeks of planning, execution, and strategy. Marcus was already at his desk, reviewing emails, organizing client communications, and preparing for the meetings we had scheduled. I poured coffee, feeling the warmth anchor my focus and sharpen my mind. Today was not about initiating action, but consolidating results and reflecting on the journey that had brought us here. I began by reviewing the contracts signed over the past weeks. Toyota International, Nexus Automotive, Raventech, and several smaller clients now trusted Doyle Strategies with critical operational oversight. Each engagement was more than a business agreement. It represented years of relationship building, strategic patience, and careful execution. I studied the documents, noting timelines, obligations, and contingencies. Every clause, every detail reinforced the credibility and reliability we had cultivated. Marcus brought over a summary of internal operations. Analysts had compiled reports on workflow efficiency, client engagement metrics, and risk management assessments. I reviewed the data, observing patterns that revealed both our strengths and areas for refinement. Each insight was another opportunity to strengthen operations, improve responsiveness, and anticipate client needs. I made annotations, adjusting project timelines, delegating tasks, and refining communication protocols. The firm was now functioning as a cohesive entity, each member aware of responsibilities and strategic objectives. Mid-morning, I conducted a call with Toyota International to review progress and upcoming initiatives. Mr. Takahashi and his team joined promptly. I led the discussion with clarity, highlighting achievements, addressing potential risks, and presenting a roadmap for continued collaboration. Questions were posed thoughtfully, probing both capacity and strategic foresight. I responded with precision, demonstrating confidence and understanding. By the conclusion, they expressed satisfaction with progress, reaffirming trust in Doyle Strategies and its ability to deliver on complex projects. Between calls, I reviewed communications from other clients. Positive feedback was increasing, with multiple acknowledgments of the firm's efficiency, reliability, and attention to detail. I drafted responses that reinforced our commitment while highlighting our strategic insights, subtly reminding clients of the contrast between our approach and the mistakes of Veltrix. Marcus prepared supporting documents, ensuring that all materials were consistent, accurate, and ready for immediate distribution. Lunch was a brief interlude, consumed while reviewing strategic notes. I reflected on the sequence of events that had led to this point: dismissal from Veltrix, the careful exploitation of errors, the trust built with clients, and the deliberate execution of plans. Each moment had contributed to the firm's current position, a foundation that was now robust, credible, and capable of supporting further expansion. The afternoon was occupied with internal strategy sessions. I gathered the team to review current projects, evaluate progress, and identify potential improvements. Analysts presented data, highlighting trends in client engagement and operational efficiency. I provided guidance, refining approaches, and ensuring alignment with overarching strategic objectives. By the end of the session, every team member understood not only their responsibilities, but also the broader goals of Doyle Strategies. Later, I prepared a briefing for upcoming potential clients. Each presentation was designed to demonstrate expertise, reliability, and insight. I emphasized the firm's ability to manage complex operations while maintaining clear communication, cultural sensitivity, and strategic foresight. The materials were comprehensive, precise, and tailored to individual client needs, reinforcing Doyle Strategies' reputation as a competent and trustworthy partner. By evening, I returned to the loft, reviewing the week's accomplishments. Contracts executed, clients reassured, team aligned, and operational processes refined. The firm had grown stronger with each interaction, and momentum was firmly established. I reflected on the journey, from dismissal to strategic leverage, from uncertainty to authority, and from preparation to decisive action. Every choice had been deliberate, every risk carefully managed, every relationship nurtured. I updated my notebook with observations and plans for the upcoming weeks. Each note, each annotation, was a step toward sustained growth and influence. Doyle Strategies was no longer a fledgling enterprise. It had become a credible, resilient, and strategically positioned firm, capable of navigating challenges and capitalizing on opportunities. The city outside shimmered under the lights, its reflection on the river a constant reminder of the scale of opportunity. The contracts, the client relationships, and the internal team were now aligned in a cohesive structure. I allowed myself a moment to recognize the transformation. The firm had not only survived the challenges of the past weeks but had emerged stronger, more capable, and strategically poised for the future. The quiet war we had waged, deliberate, patient, and intelligent, had achieved its objective. Trust, credibility, and strategic advantage had been established. The foundation was solid, the team capable, and the path forward clear. I sipped my tea, feeling the warmth as a quiet affirmation that the meticulous planning, the exploitation of opportunity, and the careful execution had culminated in lasting success. Doyle's strategies had arrived, not by chance, but through strategy, insight, and relentless focus. The morning arrived quietly. Sunlight spilled across the office, illuminating the organized chaos of folders, reports, and client files. Marcus was already at his desk, preparing for a day of final follow-ups and internal reviews. I poured coffee, letting the warmth steady my focus and sharpen my thoughts. Today would be about consolidation, reflection, and the final steps to cement the firm's position. Doyle's strategies had reached a point where execution, credibility, and strategic insight had to merge seamlessly. I began by reviewing the contracts executed over the past weeks. Toyota International, Nexus Automotive, Raventech, and several smaller clients now relied on Doyle's strategies for critical operational oversight. Each engagement represented more than business. It was a testament to the careful orchestration, patient execution, and calculated leveraging of opportunities we had pursued. I examined each clause, each obligation, and each timeline. Every detail reaffirmed the credibility and authority we had established. Marcus brought over a report summarizing internal workflows, operational efficiency, and team performance. I reviewed it thoroughly, noting strengths, minor gaps, and areas for optimization. Each observation informed adjustments to the team's roles, client management strategies, and project scheduling. Doyle's strategies now operated as a cohesive, aligned entity, with every member aware of both individual responsibilities and strategic objectives. Mid-morning, I conducted a series of client calls. With Toyota International, the delegation reviewed progress and upcoming initiatives. I led the discussion with clarity, addressing every potential concern and outlining the next steps with precision. Their responses reflected reinforced trust, an acknowledgement of our strategic competence, and a willingness to move forward confidently. This was the culmination of weeks of careful planning, patient execution, and deliberate observation. Between calls, I reviewed communications from other clients. Positive feedback indicated growing satisfaction and trust. I drafted responses reinforcing our reliability, emphasizing insight and competence without referencing competitors or previous missteps by Veltrix. Marcus prepared supporting materials, ensuring all communications were accurate, coherent, and consistent. Each interaction reinforced the narrative of Doyle's strategies as capable, thoughtful, and strategically superior. Lunch passed swiftly. I used the time to review internal notes and upcoming project schedules. Each document, each plan, each annotation was reviewed for clarity, feasibility, and alignment with strategic priorities. I reflected on the journey from dismissal to authority. The leverage created from Connor Blake's misjudgments, the careful cultivation of client trust, and the methodical execution of strategy had transformed the firm from a small startup into a recognized, credible organization. The afternoon was devoted to internal strategy sessions. Analysts and Marcus gathered around, reviewing current projects, client engagement data, and operational processes. I guided the discussion, emphasizing the importance of precision, consistency, and strategic foresight. We debated scenarios, evaluated risks, and refined contingency plans. By the session's conclusion, the team had a clear understanding of priorities and the knowledge to execute each task with competence and confidence. Later, I prepared for final communications with potential new clients. Each interaction was designed to demonstrate insight, reliability, and capability. I highlighted Doyle's strategies, success in delivering complex operational solutions while maintaining cultural sensitivity and strategic intelligence. Every proposal, Every presentation was meticulously tailored to client needs, reinforcing our firm's growing reputation. Evening arrived. I reviewed the week's accomplishments. Contracts executed, client trust reinforced, internal operations aligned, and strategic positioning secured. Doyle's strategies had not only survived challenges, but emerged stronger and more influential. The quiet war, waged with patience, strategy, and intelligence, had reached its culmination. Trust, credibility, and authority had been established. I reflected on the journey, from the initial dismissal at Veltrix to the subtle twist that created opportunity, to the meticulous execution of strategy and consolidation of client trust. Every observation, every decision, and every action had contributed to this moment. The firm's credibility was unassailable. Clients had chosen competence, foresight, and trust over arrogance and mismanagement. I updated my notebook with notes for the upcoming weeks: operational refinement, client relationship management, and team development. The foundation was robust, capable of supporting sustained growth and influence. Doyle Strategies was no longer a fledgling enterprise. It had become a resilient, credible, and strategically positioned firm, ready to navigate challenges, capitalize on opportunities, and maintain its advantage. I looked out over the city as night fell. Lights shimmered on the river, reflecting the rhythm and possibility of the urban landscape. Each contract, each client, and each team member was aligned in a cohesive structure. The firm's position was secure, the plot twists navigated, and the momentum established. Doyle Strategies had not only achieved victory, but had solidified authority, influence, and credibility. I allowed myself a brief moment of quiet satisfaction. Every challenge had been met with strategy, foresight, and patience. The firm's future was not just possible, it was assured. The journey of Doyle Strategies and of my own path through adversity had reached a turning point. The quiet war had ended with success, and the firm, my team, and I were ready for the next chapters that lay ahead. As I closed the notebook and prepared to leave the office, I felt the culmination of weeks of careful planning, deliberate action, and strategic execution. The contracts were signed, clients engaged, and the firm's credibility established. Doyle Strategies had survived, evolved, and thrived. The journey was complete.